Have you ever wondered what strange things a digital forensic investigator has to dig through? Listen to this episode to find out. Our guest today is Jake Moore. Jake Moore is a cybersecurity specialist for ESET, Europe's #1 internet security and antivirus company. Jake previously worked in the police force for 14 years investigating cybercrime in the Digital Forensics Unit and Cybercrime team in Dorset. In 2016, he was asked to implement cybersecurity advisors in order to make local communities more resilient to ever-increasing cybersecurity threats. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. Jake, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast. I appreciate you taking some time to talk with the audience today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I was curious. So you've been working for ESET for a number of years and dealing with cybersecurity in some capacity for probably almost 20 years now, 16 years. Can you give me a little background of how you got started in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I came out of university many years ago. I kind of didn't really know what I wanted to go into, but I did know that I loved crime. I was fascinated with crime. I remember actually saying to my mum, what on earth am I going to do? And she said, well, if you love crime, why don't you go and join the police? You can't obviously go and be a bank robber. Why don't you go and target the police and learn how these bank robbers work? And I thought, this is an amazing idea. All those films that I loved back in the day could finally come to life for me. So, yeah, I went and bombarded the police after university. I did maths back then. I couldn't do computing as I really actually wanted to because it just cyber computing wasn't actually there. But I said, wouldn't it be great if I could go into the police force? And there was a position available, but it was just as a statistician. But it was only about 6 months I was in there until the high-tech crime unit came up to me and said, look, we've just started this high-tech crime unit. And with your background, we'd like to train you up and put you in there and go through digital evidence. Now, I then spent 10 years in this department looking at all sorts of digital crime. And I loved it. Every day was different. We'd always be looking at anything from murder, fraud, missing people, and going through digital devices, trying to find that little nugget of information, and I'd then go to court and give my evidence that would hopefully put these bad guys behind bars. But then as the time went on, cybercrime became a much bigger area of focus for the police. And this cybercrime team formed. And again, they asked me if I'd like to go and move across to the cybercrime team and do a little bit more around cyber forensics, but also go and give my experiences out to the public. So I started to go and see my local businesses in the local area of where I live and deliver the awareness. And that's where my love of delivering what I understand as relatively easy, giving to the general public, that what I found had no real idea about the scale and magnitude of what cybercrime is actually doing. And without understanding cybercrime and what they're capable of doing, there's a huge chance that those companies are going to lose millions of dollars, or pounds in our case, down the line.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy when it comes to the amount of cybercrime that goes out there. I see numbers in the billions and billions US dollars every year in the US, and I'm sure internationally it's another magnitude more than that. It was funny when you're talking about wanting to go into having a love for crime and that aspect as a kid. I remember when I was in college, I was really interested in crime scene investigation. This was back just a few years before the CSI television shows and before the forensics type of shows came out. And I went to my local police department and said, hey, I'm interested in doing a ride-along. And they're like, oh, yeah, we do that all the time. Just do these forms. I'm like, well, but I want to go on a ride-along with the crime scene investigator. And they're like, why would you want to do that? I'm like, that's really interesting to me. And so they're like, oh, well, we don't normally do that. We've got to, talk to the chief of police and got his approval. And so spent the day with the crime scene investigator, and it was the one day in the city where there was virtually no crime.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, wait, we got a call of a vehicle burglary. And so the regular kind of front-end police guys were already there, but we'll go there and see if we can do some fingerprinting or something like that. And every case, like just before we got there, it was like, oh, no, it really wasn't a theft. Their kid took something out of the car and just didn't tell mom and dad. So it really wasn't a crime. Oh.
Yeah.
So this whole day where nothing happened. And we went back to the lab. He kind of showed me how some of the stuff in the lab works. And I found out afterwards that I was the first and only person who had ever wanted to do a ride along with the crime scene investigator. And at least for several years after that, no one else asked. And they decided we don't want anyone else to do it because we lost a day of the guy working in the lab. So well, it was a total flop. But to me, all that was really interesting. And then to see the crime scene investigation shows come out and kind of the background of how it all works is really interesting to me.
I totally get what you mean. I love those shows as well. And that's where my love for it came many, many years ago. But I did soon realize it wasn't every day that was always the fun and games that you'd expect. But in fact, it would be strange if a murder came in, because we actually get excited. Know that it's in that dark, terrible thought to think of, but it actually gave us something to really put our experience on. And actually, I do remember once I had a laptop delivered into the lab, and it was in a bag, sealed. It was covered in blood, and they said, "Look, we've got the guy. He's killed someone. We're pretty sure he's done it. You know, he was caught with an axe. However, we just, as protocol would suggest, we need to know if he was doing anything on the computer at the time, if there's anything we can relate to. Maybe he's going to have some sort of alibi he might try and use. It's always good to tie up the phone and the laptop, especially as it was in the scene of the crime." And so I get the hard drive, I take it out, I make an image of it. So I copy everything, and you always make a copy and then we work from that copy. And by protocol, I would just see if it was on at the time of the alleged offense, and it was on at the time. So you check the logs. And I thought, well, I'll see what was going on in the time frame that I've been given. And he'd been, or someone I should say, had been on Google and searched for something. I thought this would be interesting. What on earth would you be searching for around the time of a murder? And I kid you not, genuine story, this person had Googled, how do I get rid of a dead body?
Oh my goodness.
So he had killed someone, chopped them up, and then as an afterthought, thought to himself, now what do I do? How do I clean this up? I mean, I never saw the scene, but apparently it was a real bloodbath. And there's me with this laptop, and I turned to my colleagues and go, you're not going to believe this. And I said that a lot when I was in that department, but this one probably took the biscuit.
That's a pretty crazy story. So along the police front, I actually do have a question for you about like how police departments or law enforcement works. With running whatismyipaddress.com, I get a lot of people who come to me that, you know, they were a victim of a romance scam or someone hacked into their banking account, their Facebook. Usually it's their Facebook account. Usually it's social media stuff that they're worried about. And I'm sure that law enforcement probably, if someone called you and said, hey, someone broke into my Facebook account, do you guys actually do anything?
It does depend. So we have in the UK a system of reporting all cybercrime. It's called Action Fraud. And they are the front line of those smaller scams and a bit of hacking and so on. And it's really a place to try and filter out all the low chance offending that you're going to go and locate. Now, if you know who the person is that's got into your Facebook account, maybe it's your ex-partner, for example, and they've done something and it points towards that person and therefore the local police can go and do something about it, then yes, if you can locate that perpetrator, it's worth doing it. But so much of the time, this is the sad point, so much of the time we've got millions of cases coming in, and the police are just sat there thinking, well, we don't actually know who's done this. We can't go and look into the Bitcoin account because there's just no trace. They're using VPNs. They're using the dark web. We haven't got a trail here. It isn't like a murder. Even a targeted murder will leave some sort of evidence. Cybercrime is a whole new kettle of fish for the police. And it's now making up over 50% of crime, fraud and cybercrime for the police in the UK. and it's taken them right underneath their feet. And it's an absolutely such a massively difficult area to go and investigate. And to make it worse, the public are bashing the police all the time, saying, why aren't you finding out who hacked into my Facebook account?
Yeah, and they're going, well, what did they steal? What's your monetary loss? Well,
yeah.
And I think that's the hard.
That's it.
When I'm dealing with people, I think that's kind of the hardest thing for people to understand is, yeah, there is this very visceral, someone has invaded my property, someone has gained access to something very personal to me. But when there's no monetary actionable crime, it's really hard for the police to say, well, what's the payoff if we catch this person? Hey, don't do that again.
And there's always a cost involved as well. But this is it. This is why the government, actually it was the Home Office, decided that awareness is far better. So it's the old classic saying, prevention is the best cure. And so they set up all these departments around the country and said, look, if you could have a few people that could go into businesses and the public and give them that advice, tell them the reason why that person got into your Facebook account is because your password is your cat's name, who you post on Facebook with your year of birth at the end of it. Don't do that, and they won't have access. That's not a clever hack. That is social engineering. Social engineering is far too simple these days. And so if you're offering up what your password is and then using it on every single account, it's kind of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so this is where the police have wanted to really turn it back into the public and say, look, we're not going to say it's your fault. However, we really want to give you the education needed. And it's not difficult. And there are some really simple and cheap ways of bolstering all of that defenses to keep the majority of those cyber criminals away.
So let's talk about some of those simple things that we can do to keep cybercrime criminals away. And then I'll ask you some questions about kind of some of the questions that I'm often asked when it comes to Facebook accounts and social media accounts and people thinking they've been hacked and kind of, have they really been hacked and what should they do? So what are some of the awareness things that people should be aware of?
Okay, well, the first thing I go and say to people is, well, okay, do you use a password manager? Now, if I ask that to a group of people, I go and do big conferences, but say I've got 100 people in an audience, and I'll say to them, right, who's using a password manager? You'll usually find that you'll get about 8 to 10 people put their hands up. Maybe more if I'm doing it to an InfoSec community, but Joe Public, 8 to 10 people to put their hand up. That means, I always say this, that means 90% of you, roughly, are using 1, 2, or 3 passwords for everything. And that is a major, major problem. And those 3 passwords that you've got are probably going to be related to you. And they say, yeah, but no one's going to go for me. Who's going to go? I haven't got many savings, or why would anyone want to go for my social media? It's boring. And if they stole it, I wouldn't care. I mean, this drives me crazy, but it just sets in stone where the problems lie. But I then say to them, okay, well, at least turn on 2-factor authentication, or if you want to call it multi-factor authentication. You must go and set this up. It is very simple. Every social media account offers it. Every email account will offer it. And that is where you need a password to get into it. And then you'll need a one-time password that only works for, say, 20 or 30 seconds that is sent to you to your device or your smartphone. And then you've got access to get into it, only you. So if someone else did have your password of your cat's name .1, for example, then they still wouldn't be able to get into your accounts from a separate device, because that one-time passcode is going to be sent to your device in your pocket. This is seriously going to reduce the chance that they're going to get in.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a recommendation that I make to everybody is absolutely use a password manager, absolutely use 2-factor authentication. And a lot of people are like, well, it's just such a hassle to have to in that one-time PIN code. I always think about it as, well, if someone took my life savings, that's a considerably bigger hassle than me having to enter in a 6-digit number every time I log into my bank account.
But I think people don't think it's going to happen to them. I mean, when I go out for a cycle, I cycle every day, and I lose count every day of how many people are still driving whilst texting, okay, which is illegal in this country, and it gives you a lot of points on your license and a huge fine, but people still don't think it's going to happen, and they also don't think they're going to get caught. I think the same thing happens with cybersecurity, that if it hasn't happened to them or their nearest and dearest, then they just think it's one of those problems that happens to someone else. But you speak to someone that's had it happen to them, and they'll have fantastic security, and they'll understand that a password manager is actually way more convenient to have set up. I can't remember all of my 200 passwords, but my manager has them all in there. I just go and copy and paste it. That's so much easier. I don't know why people aren't joining this yet, but this is what's keeping me in a job. I get to go around the country and say to people, right, this is why you should do exactly what I'm saying. And I like to tell them a story about how I've gone and socially engineered someone, usually one of my friends, and how I've got into their website, how I can get into their WhatsApp, and how I can hack into their business. I've done a load of different scenarios to then use that as my way to make them think, maybe I might just listen to what this guy is saying.
I know the takeaway that you mentioned of like people having this mentality of like, well, I'm nobody special, I'm not being targeted. And I think that's kind of one of the things that I see is almost the flip side of that, is because these attacks aren't targeted in general, they're just, hey, I've got 100,000 username and password combinations that I'm just going to try, and it just happens to get in. No, you weren't targeted specifically, but we got in. But I also see the opposite side of that is because there's so many of these brute force attacks going on that I'm going to send this ransom email to 10 million people that someone who gets one of these actually thinks they are being specifically targeted. So it's kind of, you almost see it both ways, that when the person is looking about it, why should I do this? I'm not being targeted. But when they do receive it, it's like, well, why are they targeting me? It's almost this, once they become a victim, they feel like they have been targeted. But prior to that, why would anyone bother to attack me?
Especially when those emails might have an old password that has been breached on a separate breach from, say, I don't know, MySpace, LinkedIn, Yahoo. They've all been hacked. And then they throw it in there. And I've had people ring me up going, oh my God, Jay, you never guess what? I've had this email and it says it's got into my account. It's even shown me my password. And I've gone, okay, first of all, that's a password that was breached years ago. Second of all, it's rubbish. Thirdly, are you still using that password from many, many years ago that is probably your favorite football team? Yeah, okay, Jay, enough of that I told you so. Just make it go away.
Yeah, and I remember getting one of those, and it was using a password that I had way before I was using a password manager. I was like, wow, that's from a really, really old data breach, because I won't go into how I knew, but I knew it was from a really, really old data breach. And I'm like, yeah, but if someone's been using that password within the last year, or they use it multiple places, that just trips them emotionally. It's like, oh my gosh, they really have hacked my computer. But reality, they haven't.
That really can throw them off. You're absolutely right.
So what are some of the other awareness points that you talk about when you're public speaking?
I like to make people aware that you can phish people's information. So a lot of the time, I might even show them how their passwords can be shown to them. Because I actually found a list on the dark web, a list of 1.2 billion passwords. This is quite interesting how it had people's usernames and passwords in there. And I'm able to type in their email and come up with those passwords. And like you said, you've seen one before, which was of many years ago. But some people who are still using those passwords are extremely shocked to see that in their eyes, I have their password and email address on my laptop. Now, this scares people up, but I thought, well, I wonder how I would be able to find people's information if I didn't have that. Now, there's all sorts you can do with open source research, social engineering people by just looking them up on the internet, Googling them. Even I found information on people before using Map My Run. I don't know if you use those mapping apps and Strava and so on. People will post photos on there and so on. Again, it's another tool to find information. But I once was able to target a guy who allowed me to do this. I sent a rogue email to his PA. I said to him I was going to try and get a password out of him. And he said, go on then, mate, try it. Now, I went to his PA knowing that he would probably not touch his emails for those 3 weeks that I was going to try and get into him as a penetration test example. By going to the PA and pretending that I was from a TV company, and I wanted to use their company because they're so amazing and wonderful and they look so vibrant, bigging her up, making her like me. She couldn't believe it. She probably, I don't know, but she probably ran to the boss and said, you won't believe this, but ITV want to come and film us and speak to you on camera. Now, this was the moment where I thought he may have twigged, oh, that Jake's up to some dirty tricks. But like most people who have even been given awareness, tend to forget about that as soon as something amazing comes along. Or it's not too good to be true because, yeah, they've emailed and she checked out the background and went, oh, well, she looks like a genuine person. Of course, it comes from a real TV company. Yeah, why not? And I go, okay, fantastic. What I'm going to do is send you a document. I need the boss to fill it in. Now, I didn't go and make a fake ITV website. That would take far too long. You'd probably notice it. So I just used Google Docs. It was actually Google Forms. Google Forms is awesome, right? You can just make up a form and make it look pretty good straight away. And all you got to do is get an image of whoever you want to be, stick it at the top, add some numbers after it said application form 4.1.2 because some numbers always make it look more professional. And I asked name, age, address. I went for it. I even, just to really wind him up, I asked him for a shoe size in that form, and not just religion and disability act and so on, shoe size. Now, then in brackets, it said, we understand you may think this is odd, but we've got product placement in this TV show we're doing, and we're being sponsored by Clark's Footwear, and we need to know your shoe size so we can then order the shoes in. And then when we do some cutaways, we'll have photos or footage of your shoes whilst we're talking to you. Now, he fills this all in, and at the very last question, it's also to set up this application, you need to set up an account with ITV, so please put in your password here. He then put in his password and submitted that form straight back to me. I ring him up instantly and say, you're never going to believe what I've just done. He goes, no, you're never going to believe. I'm going to be on ITV. And I went, oh, really? Well, I know your shoe size. And he then goes, oh, my God. That is the moment he realizes that he's been duped, luckily, by his friend. But it really does prove how easy it is to make people fall for those kind of scams. Now, he knew it was coming to him, but it was packaged in a way that was so well targeted, which is what cybercriminals are doing. They're doing their homework, and this is why I do it. And I actually do this in a talk. I make it a big half-an-hour talk to really go into the detail about what those social engineer phishing cybercriminals are doing. They're very, very crafty. With that background, knowing that he would be forgetting all of that awareness advice he's been given before, and like I say, knowing that I'm going to come for him, he then still gives away a password. And funnily enough, it was his football team with a dot and then a number at the end of it. I divulged this to him, and he could not believe how easy it was for me to get that. Just asking him, you go and ask someone in the street, what's your password? They're going to say, no. Yeah, jog on. Of course. But if you package it in a way and give it a week's thought, they might hand deliver it in a lovely package for you.
Yeah, it's just looking like you're a vendor, looking like it's often what you see with any type of kind of a relational crime is that you're making the person feel good, making them feel important, that they're valuable, and just kind of feeding their ego just enough to get them to bite,
Yeah.
I would say, hey, if I came and told you I've got $20 million for you, you'd probably go, okay, well, that's a scam. But if I said, hey, there's this $200 refund. Oh, okay. Well, that's much more reasonable. And I know
that's it.
Who your cellular provider is, and it's a refund from, was it E3? Yeah. Is it EE out there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're so, of course. they're so good at doing that research. And I read up a lot about this, but it's about the powers of persuasion, the influence tactics that are used. I really like, so in my emails, I was going backwards and forwards with the PA. I used urgency as one of the key factors that just said, this needs to happen by end of play today. But I built them up. I went back to liking them. And these are two of the, I think there are 6 powers of persuasion that you'll get in any type of phishing email. If they're used perfectly, but not too much, that's when most of the people that are maybe susceptible to it will give away information, maybe passwords, maybe financial information, or even more.
I was recently talking with a psychologist about kind of the psychology of why we fall for scams. And one of those elements that she talked about that I hadn't necessarily, like, when I looked back on it, I was like, oh, that's obvious. But at the moment, I didn't think about it, was authority. That if you look like you're someone in a position of authority, you're not claiming to be the president of the United States, but you're claiming to be, well, I'm in the military, I work for the police department.
That's it.
Just enough authority to, I should listen because I'm a good person.
That works really well, actually, against military personnel as well, because they understand authority better than anyone. So if you are of a higher rank in the police force, then you do what they say. Now, you might not even know who that person is, but you make a phone call to a police officer and say you are detective, inspector, whoever. There's a good chance they're going to listen to that phone call and start divulging information that they never would. But the fact they just heard the detective inspector, they're thinking, oh, gosh, yes, I'm going to have to give you everything that I can see on my computer right now, before they even think about it. And then it's that 5 minutes later, oh, my goodness, I really don't think I should have given away that info.
I wonder how many times reporters and people for newspapers use that to find out what's going on with investigations.
Well, funnily enough, while I was in the force, that did actually happen, and they had to change the way that they would give a code. If they were ever suspected that someone wasn't who they said they were, they asked them for that week's code, and that week's code was only found in the weekly police newsletter on about page 2 or 3. And so that was their only way that they could think of that would say, well, it has to be someone from the force because they know the code. But obviously there are ways around that. But hey, it was something that they were trying to overcome because, like you say, reporters or anyone would love to ring up the police and find out what's going on.
Very much so. So are there any other, like, in your one more top awareness item?
Okay, well, I always tell people to back up their data. This is like pulling teeth. You tell people to back up and they go, yeah, that's on my to-do list. I'm going to do it. But, I'm busy right now. I'm busy tonight, but I definitely will do it. But, one of my horror stories is when this guy, he was a police officer, a good friend of mine, but it was just after Christmas, and he came to my house. He said, I don't know if you've heard, but my house burnt down because of faulty Christmas lights. Horrible time of year to happen. But he said, the house is burnt down to a crisp, but there's only this one little thing that I've got, and it's my safe. And I did leave my laptop in the safe. He said, I don't know where to go, but I know you can get deleted data back, so maybe you'll be able to get this because my computer doesn't work anymore. And I said, well, first, before we even touch that and start, getting any soot on our hands, did you make a backup? And he said, no, but I've told my wife I did. So I'm hoping that you can get all our baby photos back from this computer. And I'm looking at a box covered in ash. I'm not extremely hopeful right now. But I opened up the safe, and yes, there was a laptop in there. The laptop wasn't too badly damaged, I must admit. It was a very good, pretty fireproof safe. However, the smoke, I believe, had killed the laptop. But as you may know, you don't get the data necessarily just off from opening and turning the laptop on. I took the hard drive out and I plugged it into my home computer. And luckily, it span up. You could see the happiness on my friend's face. And I got the data off. I put it on another hard drive and I gave it to him. And he then went off knowing that he still had those 5 years of photos. Now, I see him every so often and I joke about it with him. And I say, do you still do regular backups? And he says to me, oh my God, you wouldn't believe. I'm now terrified of losing anything. He has local backups and he has about 3 cloud accounts for every photo he ever takes of his kids now, because he is desperately scared of losing any image ever again. But it's funny, it took that amount of stress and pain to him for him to be categorically always wanting to back up. Now, I do go and tell people that story, but if people don't have that personal feeling in their stomach of dread, then they tend to just put it off. Procrastination is a very easy thing to do. Mm-hmm. But until you really know what that feels like, wow. And I still speak to people today and they said, oh, I've dropped my phone. It's absolutely smashed up. I cannot turn it on. And I say, well, first thing, right, have you got the photos backed up? And they'll say, no. And I said, well, why on earth are you leaving all of your photos? Back in the old days, we never did that. Back in the old days of our photos of our childhoods and our wedding photos and whatever, they were never just kept in our pocket at all times. We had albums and albums at home physically. Even if no one's printing photos out nowadays, please go and store them somewhere else.
So I'll tell you my backup strategy, and people think I'm psycho for this. So I do have 2 separate cloud backup services. I do a rotating clone of the hard drive. So once a week, I do a full clone of the hard drive. One of those, and I have 2 drives. One stays in a safe at home, and one stays at a safe at the bank. And every week I rotate them, and then I have a local NAS as well.
Wow. I didn't think banks were being used anymore, but I didn't realize banks were being used to go and leave your hard drive there.
That's the only thing I have in that safe deposit box is a hard drive.
Yeah.
Because it's like a lot of people, like your friend, were like, well, even if they're, actually making a physical backup locally, well, they're usually it's in the same location that their computer is. And
That's
like
it.
your friend, if the house burns down, a backup really isn't a backup if the backup's in the same location.
That's such a good point, because so many people only think of one thing happening. So people may think if I have a fire, at least I've got it on the cloud. But then a lot of people will have their backup via a USB that is always connected to their computer. So ransomware comes along and kills the whole computer. It kills the backup as well, which I've seen in so many businesses. And then I say, well, have you got a cloud backup? And they say, well, yeah, we're paying just for the Dropbox minimum level, so that's going to be encrypted as well. Right, your local backup, where is it? Well, that's there as well. But I was only using the local backup because I thought I might get hacked. And, people tend to forget about what might happen. The fire situation is one, the cyber criminal is another. Wow, you're doing the right thing. I mean, I'm preaching to the converted here. Very rarely do I meet anyone who even does a backup, let alone every week.
I think one of the things that converted me is I was always pretty good about, in a previous job, I was working in IT and making sure things were backed up. And at some point when the company moved and things changed, they stopped their kind of their automated backup platform. And the CEO, it's one of those things, bad things would always happen when I would be on vacation. And so I remember getting this call when I'm on vacation. Hey, the CEO's computer crashed and he can't do anything. And we can't reboot his computer. And luckily, email and all that stuff is stored on servers and things like that. But he had some documents that were not on the server, that were only on his local machine. And I remember I'm like, well, call this company. They'll come out and see if they can get it working. They couldn't get it working. So just give him someone else's computer and he'll have to deal without those documents until I get back. I got back and yanked the drive out, tried to see if I could get the files off of it. I couldn't. So I had to take it to a local drive recovery company. And I think it was about $1,000 to get back a couple of files. It's like, well, you could have easily spent the $60 a year to have that in the cloud and had your files back in 2 minutes, but it didn't work out that way.
Man. Yeah, those people learn the hard way, but sometimes that's what it takes. And if that is what it takes, then so be it. Luckily, they can sometimes get their data recovered. Those data recovery services, they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think over here it's £500 to see if it's possible, and then a further £500 if you really want it. So, of course, everyone's got to the £500 level and then gone, well, if you can get it, well, of course, I'm going to give you another 500 quid to go and get it. So, hey, take my money. But they've learned the hard way. I think the toughest is I've seen people who have genuinely lost their data on maybe like the old days of an iOS upgrade, and they haven't done a backup. And when it used to brick your phone sometimes, and then they say, right, Jake, can you get that data back? And, iPhones, crafty as they are, very difficult with the equipment I used to have to go and get those photos back. And you'd see the dread on their face of going, there's thousands of photos for many years that's just been disintegrated in just a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it baffled me that whenever I hear people, hold on a second, I need to delete some photos off of my phone so I can take some new photos. I'm like, you're not storing them anywhere else? You don't just have your recent ones on your phone? What are you doing?
It's a great point, yeah. But people just need awareness. I mean, it comes back to your whole point. And I love talking to people about awareness. Try and make it interesting. I don't want to be too scary. Yeah, I probably sounded a little bit scary tonight, but I really like to be able to give people just the chance to go and do it themselves. If they can then understand what I've said and then go away and think, you know what, that guy, he probably had a point. I will go and get a password manager. He said it's not too easy. And if my mum is my test, right? She's 73. If my mum can do it, anyone can. Okay, so she's my guinea pig. Everything that I go and tell people, if I say it's easy, I know it's easy because I've watched my mum do it. I've set her up with it to be able to do it herself. And then I then say to people, you know what, if she can, you can. And that's what I love when they think, you know what, maybe I just will.
Yes, that's a good one. If mom can do it, anyone can do it because mom's not IT.
That's right.
So there's kind of one thing of awareness that I find actually trips people up frequently trips people up is when you have social media sites. Let's use that. Let's use Facebook as an example. That you can go into Facebook and say, someone thinks they've been hacked. And so they go into their Facebook account and say, well, show me all my recent access history. And so all of a sudden they start seeing all these IP addresses and all these locations, and they utterly freak out going, oh my gosh, there's a dozen people accessing my Facebook account over the last 6 months or whatever, as far as the history goes back. Because one of the challenges is Facebook doesn't know that was really you or not you. It's just an IP address. It doesn't know whether it was your home IP address or when you were at the coffee shop or you were at the mall on the Wi-Fi or you were at your office on the Wi-Fi there. And IP address geolocation isn't always that accurate. It might be a couple cities over. Maybe it's right. Maybe it's even, hundreds of kilometers away. And so the immediate assumption is, oh my gosh, somebody has gotten into my account. So it's unfortunate that sometimes providing more information almost backfires. Like, hey, we're going to create awareness. We're going to let you see the activity, but we're not going to give you the tools to understand what that activity means.
But if they are using two-factor authentication, then they can clearly understand, or if they clearly understand
Yes.
it, then they can sit back and know that each of those access IPs would have been them if they truly understand it. So yeah, of course, the awareness has to go with education hand in hand. It's making them aware this is possible, but it's then teaching them, well, actually, this is what it is, and this is why it works, and this is why there's a good chance, a 99.9% chance that someone else won't have got into your account. And if you set it up correctly, then if someone was to get into your account, you'd even get an email to say someone on this IP has just entered or accessed your Facebook. And so therefore, it's the only way to go about it on all of your accounts.
Yep, exactly. And then you have the people who get fraudulent emails, forged emails saying, hey, someone tried to access your Facebook account. Click here to confirm that it wasn't you.
True. But the number one rule is, God, never click on any link like that. No way.
Never click on an authentication link. Always go directly to the source and verify it there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I super appreciate you spending half an hour, 45 minutes of your time with us today, sharing your experiences. Is there any final word of advice you have that you'd like to give people?
Do one of the things that I've spoken about tonight. If there's anything you're going to go away with, at least promise me you're going to do one of those things. Password manage, backup, set up 2FA. If you haven't done one of those three, go and do that now. You will notice the benefits in years to come.
I like that. Pick one and do it in the next half an hour.
Even better.
So if someone wants to learn more about you, hear more about where you're speaking, how can they find out about you? How can they find out more about ESET?
I've got my own website, which is where I promote all my stuff that I'm doing, which is jakemore.uk. Or you can follow me on Twitter, which is Jake_More. UK, and that's more with MOORE. That's how you spell it. So yeah, I'd love it if you want to keep in touch. I'm always open to any questions. Contact me through there, and thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Prey podcast. If you found this episode helpful, tell a friend and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Jake Moore can be found at easyprey.com/17. Have you been a victim of a scam, and are you interested in sharing your story with the Easy Prey audience? Head over to easyprey.com/mystory to learn more.